Hello and welcome to the Film Brain podcast. It's been a little while, almost 18 months by my count in actual fact, but we're back and we've got a big bumper episode for you today because I recently went to the BFI London Film Festival, the UK's biggest film festival and certainly one of the major festivals on the full awards calendar. So I've seen a number of the big major movies that are coming out this winter and some of which next year and maybe in some cases the year after that. So we have got a big bumper crop of movies to review on this episode. In fact, I think it's 31 movies that I've seen at this festival, but of course there were plenty of other people at the festival, and one of the people that I met was Jack. Do you want to introduce yourself, Jack?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jack Martin. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my podcast debut, funnily enough. So, yeah, this is a lot of stress already, but I'm feeling confident. I have been running my own website called Film Feeder for the last 10 years. So that's www.filmfeeder.co.uk. Basically, I provide my own little written reviews using my own skills in analysis and just writing skills to give my thoughts on and just about anything from the big Marvel blockbuster to the most obscure art house films. So whatever I can see, basically. So I put all my stuff on Film Feeder and I hope you're all up for the ride because here we go.
I met up with you on, I think, my first day at the festival this year. What was that? Late September?
Yeah.
For those who are not aware, the BFI London Film Festival's press calendar is a little bit weird because it starts before the festival, which always catches people out every single year.
I think they try and get a lot of them in early so critics can spend a lot of time all on other films. So
yeah, exactly. I think the ones that screen earlier the week before are the ones that have kind of debuted at other festivals. That kind of catches people out because sometimes they don't rescreen those films, at least for press, during the actual press week of the festival while it's running, which can be a little bit annoying for some people.
It's bizarre that they do that, because there's some of the most anticipated films there. They only have one screening, and we'll get to this later when with the Poor Things Chicken Run debacle, but it's kind of insane that they put one screening on for all of that, and then just I get that there's a lot of films to get through, but even still, it'd be nice to spread it out. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many films at the festival. I can understand that scheduling it is an absolute nightmare. And I just want to say, by the way, just an absolute thanks to everyone at the BFI, everyone that volunteered at the film festival. They were all really wonderful, really lovely, really courteous and understanding, especially because I don't think that's an easy job at all. The amount of people that they have to just kind of file around. The film festival has this kind of unique coin-based system where they, have a number of coins that kind of matches the amount of seats in that screening. So there's kind of you got the coin, you're guaranteed a seat in that screening. It's first come, first serve for a lot of it. I feel like this year it was much more competitive than it was last year. Last year was the first time I did it in person. This is my 4th year covering the festival, but it felt like it was much busier this year. Did you get that impression?
Yeah. No, I definitely felt that there was a lot going on. I think, which is surprising because the festival happened during the strikes, the SAG-AFTRA was WGA
Yeah.
Did they settle before or after the festival?
I think they settled just before the WGA, but the SAG-AFTRA strike was still ongoing.
It was, yeah. So there was
that had the impact of pretty much knocking out a lot of production over here because we're very linked with America.
One upside to the SAG-AFTRA, obviously the actors couldn't be there, was it was a lot more, especially the red carpet stuff, it was a lot more about the films themselves and the filmmakers rather than the big stars, which is kind of refreshing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you did some of those red carpets, didn't you? You kind of went to the fan areas, which I didn't really do.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to do them. I'm just curious. You get a bunch of autograph dealers and stuff that kind of ruin it for everyone, but that's a whole other thing. But so the ones I went for, the red carpet premieres they had for One Life, which was the American Express Gala, and it was just the director was there, James Hawes, and I hope I'm saying that name right. And there was also the later one for The Zone of Interest, which had I think it had one of those interim agreements, so the cast or maybe the actors just weren't part of SAG-AFTRA, so they could obviously promote. It was just nice and so much space, like I miss that, when it's all crowded and stuff, like calling for like Brendan Fraser or whatever, and it can be so, and I suffer from severe anxiety, and like I don't do well in crowded spaces at all, so it was just nice to have like all that kind of like arm's length freedom. It was just so liberating. I wish there were more like that, but it won't be, which is sad.
It felt very different this year because the strikes were still ongoing while many of them were still happening. It meant that it kind of recalibrated onto the actual filmmakers themselves, which arguably is the right place for them to be. But the other big thing about the festival this year, it's the first one with Christy Matheson as the new festival director, and I was wondering if there was going to be a bit of a change of tone this year to the previous years, but actually no, it felt fairly consistent. It felt pretty much like it did the year before, actually.
I will say that it felt that there's been a lot more focus on homebred films, like British films, like because Saltburn opened the festival, and then The Kitchen, which is co-directed by Daniel Kaluuya, it closed it. So with that in place of something like Poor Things, which obviously is much bigger production, having those smaller films instead of like the bigger like awards contenders made it feel more like appreciative of like our proper British films,
Yeah, especially a lot of the premieres were kind of smaller British films. Of course, the big British film that premiered at the festival was Chicken Run, and of course we're going to be talking about that later.
Yes.
But enough talking about the festival. We got a lot of films to cover. Let's get started. So we're going to start with, what was it, day -6 before the festival actually started. This would have been late September. This was a Wednesday. I believe I have a little vloggy clip that I recorded during the festival, so we're going to cut to that for a moment. Good morning. Technically, the festival doesn't start for another week, but that doesn't stop me because, unfortunately, the press week actually starts before the festival. So I am making a special trip on Wednesday, the 27th of September. I've been up since about 10 to 5 in the morning. I'm a little bit tired. It's just before 9 a.m, and I'm here to see the new Richard Linklater movie, but here I am at the National Film Theatre for the first set of press screenings. There's me getting the day completely wrong. I'm so tired in that clip. I'm just standing there in front of the South Bank, standing behind this sign, trying not to look like an absolute pillock while recording this vlog. And of course, I'm disguised from the street. I'm behind this sign, so people are kind of walking past me, not realising I'm recording, like, what is he doing over there? How do people record public vlogs like that?
Oh no.
Anyway, first movie at the festival, very strong one to start on, Hitman, which is the new Richard Linklater movie. So this stars Glenn Powell. He is a professor who also works as a tech for the local police department. He ends up being recruited in to do an undercover operation because another cop has been suspended. So he ends up taking the place in this meeting, pretending to be a hitman, and actually, surprisingly, he's pretty good at it. And he develops this persona, and then he eventually meets a woman played by Adriana Jonah that he suddenly feels is innocent and could actually be protected. And so he manages to get her off of that conviction, but then starts a relationship with her. And this was a really nicely done comedy thriller. It's based very loosely on a true story, and the film kind of makes a joke about how loosely it's based on that, even at the end credits going, that didn't happen. Which I thought was funny. Glenn Powell, I underestimated him a little bit, I think, because I haven't seen him in a whole bunch of things. Obviously, you'll know him from Top Gun Maverick, where he was kind of the Goose equivalent in that movie. He was kind of a bit cocky. This is a very different role, actually. And the film is very much about kind of transformation. His character starts out as this very geeky guy with kind of glasses, and he goes around in jorts. He's got this kind of Paul Blart kind of vibe almost.
His cats are named Id and Ego, I think, as well.
Yeah, exactly. They really play into that theme, the way that he kind of starts adopting many of the traits of the hitman persona that he's developed, especially as the lines between his two identities start to become blurred. What I really liked about this movie in terms of its direction is that Linklater doesn't oversell the comedy. It's actually quite understated a lot of the time, which I thought helped it a lot, because I feel like there is a version of this movie where you could have really, really kind of pushed that and kind of made it very broad. Instead, it has a very, almost kind of subtle charm about it, almost like a 70s Burt Reynolds vehicle, almost.
Yes.
I also really liked the chemistry between Pau and Adria Arjona. I thought
incredible.
She was fantastic in that movie.
Yeah.
I always think it's a little bit cringe when critics say, oh, this is a really sexy movie. But in this case, no, really, it is a genuinely very sexy movie.
This is like out of sight level of on-screen chemistry. Like, what
bonkers.
they have together is insane. It's like kind of like old school kind of like screwball, it happened one night kind of pairing where it's just like, these two people go so well together and they work off each other so well that it's just like, all the time, even when stuff happens, like, you're always rooting for them to be together because, you know, my God, they just click so well.
They absolutely steam up the screen. Like, some of the scenes are just so romantic.
Oh, yes, it's erotic.
The chemistry is undeniable. I came out of that movie and I thought that Arjona was a star in the making. Again, I hadn't really taken notice of her before, and this really made me sit up. I think that when this movie comes out, this is going to be really well received.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I'm just going to come out and say it. I think this is my favourite film of the festival. It really, I know we've saying that
it's
right
one
at the
of
beginning.
My favourites, yeah.
I know saying that right at the beginning is kind of dangerous, especially because there's a lot to get through. But this really was my favourite. I absolutely loved this movie. I thought it was funny, it was charming, like you said, it was sexy, and what I loved about it is, like, this is a film that juggles so many different tones. Obviously it's comedic, then it gets pretty serious, but there's such a great balance, and I think Richard Linklater is such a generous director in that, you know, he allows scenes to just kind of play out exactly for how long they need to be. This is my favourite, the best film he's made since Boyhood, which I also loved, and this was just great, and it really kind of kills me that it's going straight to Netflix. This
was something that people were discussing at the festival. It was just before the screening. It was kind of announced that Netflix had it, and there was a lot of people that had gone to that screening that were actually disappointed. They went, "Oh, really?"
Yeah,
it's a movie that deserves to be seen in a cinema, in all honesty.
We were at the press screening for this. The whole way through, the audience was just, they were laughing hard. There were even moments of applause during it, which was just...
Yeah, genuinely, there's a scene quite late in the movie. I'm being quite careful here because obviously this is almost spoiler territory, but there's a scene late in the movie that has got a lot of suspense in it, but there's also quite a bit of comedy. It's kind of juggling that simultaneously, and it's so definitely handled that when that scene finished, the entire audience erupted into applause. That doesn't happen very often.
No, that caught me off guard. It's just like, wow, this is going over so well. Yeah, it's a great scene.
It's a phenomenally played scene. I've heard actually reports at other festivals that other audiences have done the exact same thing at that same scene. They all just kind of went, that is brilliant, and they all just started applauding. And that's why it's such a shame that, you know, Netflix has got it, and it probably won't get a big theatrical run before it lands on the service, because it's the kind of movie that is a genuine, unfiltered crowd pleaser. It's probably Richard Linklater's funniest, most mainstream movie since probably School of Rock, in all honesty.
Ooh, yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree with you on that. This is like... I mean, I love School of Rock, and 20th anniversary this year, but like 20 years later, he's made a film that's just kind of got that School of Rock energy, man. Like, I can't express how much I really love this movie, and I really hope people get to see it in a cinema with a crowd. Make sure you get a chance to see this on the big screen. If not, Netflix is fine, but yeah, please try and see this with a crowd as much as you can, because it really deserves it.
Really deserves to be seen that way. But at least with Netflix, it will get seen, so I guess there is at least that. People, you know, when you think of subscription services, everyone thinks of Netflix, so at least people are probably going to see this and they're really going to love it. I think it's released next year on Netflix. Definitely check out Hitman. Yeah. So, going from one of the best movies at the festival to arguably one of the worst. Our next movie is The Beast.
Yeah, quite a turnaround, yeah.
It was a day of real extremes, this first one. This was a really competitive screening, as I recall, as well. Like, it was completely full. Lots of people were trying to get into it, to the point where I actually think they put an extra screening of it later in the festival because people didn't get in to see it. Those people were lucky, in actual fact. So, The Beast is the new film from Bertrand Bonello, who did Saint Laurent and Zombie Child. It's kind of got this multiple timeline structure. So it's set in a near future of 2044. where AI has taken over, but it's also got this kind of post-pandemic landscape as well. Can you guess when this movie was written? Léa Seydoux plays a woman in this future who agrees to go through a procedure that will replay her memories from past lives that are embedded in her DNA, because she has this undeniable sense of dread and fear throughout her entire being. But she also finds herself inexplicably drawn to another man played by George Mackay, who is tied to her past. And so there are several different timelines running through this movie. You've got a period section in 1910, then you've got one in 2014, and then finally you've got 2044, which is the wraparound. This movie is a great big honking mess. I described it to other people at the festival as being the Homer Simpson makeup shotgun of movies, in that it's the big bundle of ideas and just shoots it right at the wall with no shape or definition whatsoever. It's 2.5 hours long, and it feels even longer than that, in my opinion. We both sat through this movie. I think we were sat apart during this screening.
Yeah, we were.
And when we reunited at the end of it, I remember you walking up to me going, what the hell did we just watch?
Yes.
Always a great thing to come out of a screening thinking of.
Yeah, that is pretty much verbatim what I said, because this movie, because you're right, I was like bit further towards the screen than you were, but I was sitting there just in kind of like in a ponderous pose, as just like chin on the thing, that really like probably pretentious thing that most some cinema people go. It's just like, but the whole time my face was just going like, what? For those who can't see the video, I'm just in an absolute state of like confusion and just like, what am I watching? I don't know what is happening, because apparently this is based on a book, right? This is
yes, so it's very loosely based on Henry James's The Beast in the Jungle, which is what the English title refers to. The film is largely in French, but there is quite a bit of English dialogue. I looked at the synopsis of The Beast in the Jungle. It's very loosely inspired by it from the looks of it, so it's not like a faithful adaptation, but it's clearly taking elements from it and kind of spinning it into this new narrative. The problem is the movie doesn't feel very coherent at all, and my plot synopsis there probably makes it sound more intelligible than it actually is at points.
It's like when, obviously Stanley Kubrick, when he adapted The Shining, and obviously Stephen King famously hated it because obviously it was much looser with the narrative. Like, I imagine this is like that, only if it was if someone like David Lynch directed it when he was just flat out drunk.
There is definitely a Lynchian quality to this movie,
especially during the 2014 section, which is like very. Yes. It clearly wants to be like Mulholland Drive, but it is very. It's not.
The thing about this movie is that when I think back upon it, I can kind of identify more of the ideas and themes. As I mentioned, you can definitely tell this is a film that was kind of cooked up during the height of the COVID pandemic, because there's so much of the 2044 stuff that kind of represents that, that I wonder might actually feel quite dated in only a few years' time. The period stuff, the 1910 stuff, is much of the first half of the movie, and I was dreadfully bored for a lot of it, I've got to be honest. I sat there going, when exactly is this movie going to start properly? There's this kind of chance encounter between Mackay and Seydoux, and they kind of knew each other in the past, and they've kind of reconnecting their relationship. I think the big problem with why The Beast doesn't cohere very well, Léa Seydoux and George Mackay, I think, are two good actors. They just don't have the chemistry together to make this work.
No, they don't. And actually, George Mackay was a late replacement for Gaspard Ulliel.
Yeah.
He sadly passed away, and apparently the role was originally meant for him. He obviously died before he could do it, so they got George Mackay, and who, to his credit, he does speak a lot of French during it, so props for him for actually kind of going in for that language. But yeah, you're right, it's a very awkward chemistry between him and Seydoux. They don't act like lovers or anything, they just act like people who are just there to read lines.
Like, there's meant to be this kind of cosmic tragedy. There are these people that almost, but never quite, due to circumstance, there's something always kind of separating them, even though they're drawn together. Mm-hmm. And the period ending of that section was actually the point of it which I started to get interested in what was going on, and then I realised, oh, that's the climax of that portion of the movie, and it's over now. And then it turns into basically Mulholland Drive Light for the second half of the movie.
Mulholland Drive by way of Joker.
In that incarnation, Sadu is an actress, George Mackay is an incel. Yeah, didn't have that on my festival bingo card. So he's an incel, he is making video blogs about how much he hates women. Those two characters, even though they shouldn't be in each other's orbit, somehow they find themselves being drawn together. There's kind of repeated elements in some of it. There's this clairvoyant character that Sadu keeps kind of seeing in various incarnations.
This is straight out of Inland Empire, yeah.
There's a recurring gag in the 2014 stuff. I think this opens the movie, which is a really jarring way of opening it, where Sadu is on a green screen and she has to act out this entire thing. Again, it ties into that movie's sense of isolation and disconnection, and those are probably some of the best scenes in the movie, but again, everything kind of feels weirdly disconnected with each other and doesn't make any sense. At one point very late in the movie, Sadu's laptop gets infected with a virus and it starts showing clips from trash humpers all over it, which is about the point where I went, is this a troll movie? Is this just designed to troll the audience? A feeling that wasn't diminished by the fact that when the movie ended, it had no credits. It just came up with a QR code on the screen.
That was the moment it was just like, okay, I feel like this movie's just screwing with me now. Like, it's just it's the equivalent of like putting like people, actors' Twitter handles in their credits names. It's just like, I hope to God that doesn't become a thing going on, because I get why they do it, you know, for spending time, but that's probably really insulting to like all the people that worked on it. It's just like, your name's not even attached to the end of it.
I actually was reading some of the Letterboxd reviews, and someone actually linked to what this ending was, and it is literally just mostly the end credits, but there is a little extra scene with the clairvoyant character. She's on the laptop, Sadu's laptop, after the events of what's happening, and she's going like, you need to contact this guy, you need to figure out who this guy is. It doesn't really add very much to the movie at all. It's just kind of there. I don't know why it's not attached to the end of it. There's no reason that this movie doesn't have credits
and then Samuel L. Jackson shows up with an eye patch just to say, yeah, this is weird, I'm out.
The Beast will be out next year. We don't recommend it.
No, let's skip this one. Let's get this one, yeah. Skipping
forward to the subsequent Monday, which was day -2, and I came in for Memory, which is the new film from Mikel Franco, who previously did New Order, which appeared at the London Film Festival a few years ago. Jessica Chastain is a social worker who goes to a high school reunion where she's followed home by Peter Sarsgaard, and he has dementia. She eventually begins becoming his carer, and they kind of form a relationship with each other. This was a little bit of an odd one. This had quite decent reviews coming out of the other festivals, and I liked it quite a bit, but I think dramatically it's a little bit odd in a lot of ways. Chastain and Sarsgaard are two great performers, really fantastic, but I don't think that some of the stuff that happens in this movie works. It feels really out of place. One of the things that I can think of is that there's a very early scene where Sarsgaard and Chastain are meeting in a park, and she makes a very serious accusation. He doesn't seem to remember it at all, but she's adamant that this is actually the case, and then she throws away the necklace that he has with his information, leaving him effectively stranded in the middle of the park. That's a very, very odd scene, especially in retrospect of how the movie eventually turns. I don't know if the movie earns that kind of moment. I kind of get what's meant to be there. It's kind of meant to be about kind of like the fallibility of memory, and it turns out later that this is a misaccusation. It kind of sours the audience's mind on what's going on, makes it less credible to believe what's happening later with these characters. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I feel this is a very subdued film. Like, this is a film that, it reminds me a lot of Causeway from last year.
Yes, the Jennifer Lawrence movie.
It's a film that's very much driven by the central performances. Obviously here it's Chastain and Sarsgaard, both of whom, honestly, give excellent performances in this. Peter Sarsgaard, he won the Best Actor trophy at the Venice Film Festival. It's very well deserved. It's a very raw performance, and it's very careful with how he's coming across, because obviously one false step and it can be very wrong. But I thought he did it phenomenally. You know, obviously, I don't have dementia myself, but I do have family members that have it, and it's not pretty. And I think he really captured the frustration of it, just the absent-mindedness of people in that position, and it's very powerful. Honestly, they are by far the best thing about it. Otherwise, the film is very subtle in its drama. You know, there's obviously quite a few revelations, especially later on with some of Chastain's past, but there's also the hints that there's more that could be explored with this, and the film never really does. It kind of ends rather abruptly, honestly. Like, it's just, it reaches a point where you think it's going to go on for at least another 10 minutes, but then, no, that's it. That's the end. Goodbye.
I like the sensitivity it handles its subject matter. I think that Sarsgaard avoids falling into the cliches of portraying a character with dementia. You can tell that there's an obvious frustration from him because he knows what his abilities was, and now he finds himself being restricted somewhat and having to do things he didn't want to do. He still wants to maintain a degree of his own autonomy, and I think that through Chastain he finds that. There's some nice moments between them. There's that moment where Chastain and him are watching a movie together, and then she gradually realises, oh, he can't really interpret a movie anymore. He can't really understand that. It's kind of that relationship kind of figuring out what he can do, what can't he do, figuring out each other's kind of limitations and trying to work with them or work past them to a degree. The kind of relationship that builds between them is probably the most authentic part of the movie. And of course, there's also the subplot with Chastain's mother, who is probably one of the worst mothers in the world, the Jessica Harper part. Oh my goodness, she's just absolutely monstrous in this movie.
Yeah, that was a kind of interesting. It's nice seeing Jessica Harper in things again, obviously. Yeah. You know, people know her from Suspiria, and it's nice seeing her in the stuff where she could just let loose and just be, you know, like you said, just an absolute nightmare. And especially, you know, how she's complicit in a lot of the things that Chastain's character went through, again, without giving any spoilers away, but it's pretty horrific. It's
the kind of movie that I'd imagine would play quite well in art houses. The strength of it lies entirely with the performances. I think that on a dramatic level, in terms of its script, I don't think it's entirely smooth sailing on that front. I think the performances carry the movie over that, but I don't think it's quite as substantial as it potentially could have been. I mean, it's a great showcase for two actors.
Maybe there's a chance Peter Sarsgaard can sneak in like Brian Tyree Henry did earlier this year, so there's that chance, and it will be deserved, honestly. Yeah,
it is worth checking out for those two, but it's definitely, I would say, kind of 3.5 star kind of movie. It was still a better movie than the second film we saw that day. You were going to actually see something else, and then I kind of convinced you into seeing this, and I feel bad in retrospect.
No, it's fine. I mean, so I just wasn't planning on seeing anything, because I saw, before Memory, I saw Monster. So I was just planning on just bumming around, and I was like, hey, what about Baltimore? You up for that? And it's just like, yeah, sure, why not? And then we literally I think you went off to Isaloo or something, and then I went in, and it was literally just when the film was just starting. Like,
yeah, so I missed a minute or two of this movie, but I knew from a couple of the reviews where it was heading in the opening minutes, so I didn't lose too much. I'd come back in before the pre-title sequence had
You
ended.
honestly missed nothing, because it doesn't really add anything as you're about to find out.
So Baltimore is a biopic of debutante turned IRA member Rose Dugdale, who was played in the film by Imogen Poots, who joins an art heist at Rusborough House and then has to hide from the police. This movie was directed by Joe Lawler and Christine Malloy, who previously did Rose Plays Julie The big problem with Baltimore is its structure. Why, oh why, is this movie broken up into a non-linear structure? There is no reason why this movie has to play out cutting between multiple timelines simultaneously, and if anything, it actually massively dilutes the entire point of the movie. Like, I think that you could make a really compelling biopic about Dugdale, especially because she kind of starts out from this kind of activist point of view and then she gradually becomes radicalized. But when you break it up like this and you play it in kind of the wrong order, almost like it's on iPod shuffle, with seemingly no real justification for doing that, that really becomes lost over the course of the movie. It just kind of cuts between various events, like the art heist continues all throughout the entire movie. We just see it in bits and pieces and fragments. Like, it doesn't have any kind of logic to the kind of editing a lot of the time. There's a moment where they're kind of stitching up the wound in Rose's hand. We don't see what caused that for a little bit, rather than kind of tying those two events together for the audience to actually, you know, understand it. The other thing that I really kind of got annoyed about was the movie was constantly trying to bring up captions to kind of clarify where it was in time, which just exemplified the problems with breaking it up like this, because it's clear that they were struggling to follow it themselves. And I did love that there are several scenes that just start out with a caption saying, South London squat. Like, why do we need to have a caption that's that specific? Just put South London. Why does it need to be South London squat?
It's like if Harry Potter just opened up with text that said the cupboard under the stairs, number 4 drive, or whatever. I felt that exactly that. It felt like they were trying to do like a Reservoir Dogs thing, you know, have it be like this heist thriller that's kind of told non-linear. But you're right, it's so fragmented, and there is no focus to it. Like, there are moments in this film where you have no idea who these people are. Like, you don't really know that much about Rose Dugdale in this. You don't know about anything about the people that she's doing the heist with, or like all the stuff with her being radicalized. It's really random. There are scenes of her like when she's attending Oxford, and there's a scene where she's going in with another student, they're disguised as men, and they just rep all their disguises off and just cause a havoc. And if we got more stuff like that, because that's the sort of thing I kind of want to be focused on, not just this one thing where it's just kind of so broken up that it's hard to really kind of get a track on it. It's very weird the direction they went with this.
I don't understand why they edited it in this fashion. Even if they constructed the script, an editor could restructure this movie where it was actually in a linear fashion. I think it would be far more effective considering the themes and the subject matter. You kind of see this transformation over the course of the movie, and instead it's just kind of random and all over the place. It's not helped by the fact that the movie incorporates dream sequences.
Yeah.
The bane of everyone's existence, the completely unnecessary dream sequence that exists to add some jolt into the movie when clearly there wasn't any. She starts contemplating killing someone, and there's this whole dream sequence, I think actually several dream sequences, where she fantasizes about killing this guy, and then it turns out, no, that hasn't happened in reality. Well, why throw that in the movie when the movie's already got a non-linear structure? It seems so unnecessary.
Yeah, and it really kind of throws you as just like, okay, now it's kind of like getting a bit more interesting. It's just like, nope, that didn't happen. So just kind of like, oh, God. And I'll spare a thought for Imogen Poots, honestly. Because
I know.
I think both of you and I are on the same page. Imogen Poots is a great actor. There are performances there where she just absolutely blows out the water, and yet she keeps landing films that are just not deserving of her talents. You know, like...
No. This is one of them. Like, she commits big time to this movie. She's in every single scene of it, and she's fantastic in it, but the movie doesn't serve her at all. It just kind of just flops around all over the place. It's a real shame, in all honesty. A bit of a disappointing one for me.
This was, yeah, I mean, I really want Imogen Poots to have that kind of film where people get to see, like, oh, she can actually be not just a great actor, but also like this really big draw. It looks like she's still searching for it, because sadly this isn't it, at least not for us anyway.
Yeah, I believe Baltimore will be out at some point next year.
Yeah, I don't think this has a distributor yet.
I'm not sure if this has a distributor in America yet either. It might be a bit of a tough sell considering the subject matter and the fact that it's not all that great. So now we finally get to day one of the official festival, October 4th, and I had an absolutely nightmarish day because there were train strikes in the UK and unfortunately, they always coincide with the BFI London Film Festival, largely because around the same time there's the Conservative Party conference that happened last year. So I kind of prepared for it and went, okay, I'm going to travel in by coach, even though I really do not travel very well on coaches at all. So I was up at 4:30 in the morning on this day.
Ooh.
I got into London about 6. I was really travel sick. Once I got fresh air, I was fine. That very quickly went away, but was instead replaced by constant hiccuping on and off throughout the entire day. Oh my goodness, I've got video of this, so we're going to cut to that right now. Good morning, it is October the 4th. I'm in the middle of Piccadilly Circus. You might recognise this as the place where the climax of An American Werewolf was. And I have called a coach into London because there are rail strikes. Solidarity to the strikers, but that was not a pleasant experience. But I am here for Saltburn because that will be screening at 20 to 9. Oh boy. I'm not looking forward to the coach trip back, can you already tell? I've had a bit of a rough ride, and I've got hiccups. Right on cue. Right on cue. Man, this is going to be a fun vlog. The comic timing on that hiccup couldn't be any better if it tried, in all honesty.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
So, what did I do all of that effort for? Saltburn. Now, I'm actually doing a solo video for this. That will probably pop up before this podcast, so I'm not going to linger too long on Saltburn. If you haven't seen Saltburn, it's about an Oxford student played by Barry Keoghan in 2006-2007 who comes into the orbit of a wealthy student played by Jacob Elordi who invites him to his family's estate, Saltburn. And things get a little bit twisted. I thought that it was quite good for 2/3 of it, and then Fennell just sticks a bunch of TNT underneath it and blows the whole thing up.
Mm-hmm. Third act of this film is where a lot of people seem to be split over, and I can honestly understand it. I saw this, not at the press screening, I actually saw it at the public screening.
Yeah, you saw it a couple of days later, didn't you?
I did, but when I saw it, like, it was one of those things like, oh, the third act is when things get really, like, weird and just out there. And it's just like, in the back of my mind, I'm just like, what, do they turn into, like, vampires or something? And it's like, and then when I see it, again, without giving anything away, it's just like, you know what, honestly, some of this would have made sense if they were just vampires, honestly. The
movie that Fennell has set up in the first 2/3 of it doesn't work with where the movie eventually ends up. Like, suddenly it veers course completely, and then it, like, speed runs through a bunch of plot points very quickly. It feels really rushed. The wealthy family, they're self-absorbed, but they're not despicable enough that there's any kind of catharsis in what happens in it. It just kind of happens. I don't know about you, did you come out of this movie going, hang on, am I supposed to feel sorry for the rich people in this? Like, what is meant to be what we're taking away from what has just happened?
You know, there's one thing that this movie is missing, and it's motivation. Like, I came out feeling that certain characters in this, you never really get a feel for why they're doing the things they're doing. It just came across as, like, because they can, you know, like...
Yes.
I'll be honest, I think I like this movie a bit more than you. I've seen this movie twice since.
So have I at this point, actually.
I went to, obviously, the London Film Festival, and I actually went to a screening that actually had Emerald Fennell in person. She was doing her own on-stage interview with Edith Bowman for her podcast. Emerald Fennell is one of those writers where, you're right, she has a great setup, but then doesn't really know where to go with it or how to end it.
Yeah.
I think she's much better behind the camera as a director, because I found that this movie had a really great Gothic style. I felt that it was
really fantastic cinematography. She's leveled
Lena
up
Sandgren,
quite a bit since Promising Young Woman.
I came away feeling this is kind of like a mix of The Talented Mr. Ripley and something mixed with something like Brideshead Revisited, because there's a lot of Patricia Highsmith coded stuff in here, and visually it works great, and I wish the script was a lot sharper. Personally, I felt Promising Young Woman had a lot more oomph to it. I had a lot more to say about certain things. You could understand understand motivations clearer. And I know you have kind of the same feeling about Promising Young Woman in that.
Yeah, I felt like, again, Fennell kind of sets up something that's interesting and then just kind of goes, whoop, I'm subverting that. I mean, you go, why are you subverting that? What's the point of subverting that?
I felt Promising Young Woman did that a bit better than Saltburn. Well, at the very least, it'll get Sophie Ellis-Bextor back in the charts again.
What I took away from Saltburn, arguably, is that I would really love to see just an out comedy by Fennell. A lot of the stuff in the first 2/3 of it is basically comedy drama. It is, and there's some really funny lines. And I think that Fennell has a great wit about her dialogue. I would just like to see her do comedy. Saltburn suddenly feels this need to become a thriller, and it doesn't need to be.
No.
Like, it's being promoted as this gothic thriller, and I feel like that's kind of because it's unclassifiable, because it turns into a different movie. Like, it's
really
not a thriller,
yeah.
and then it suddenly is. It's just not very coherent, and it kind of gets lost in itself. It's unfortunate. I mean, there's a lot of things to like about it, but that ending, boy, does that sour the rest of the movie.
It kind of does.
I'm astonished at how much the movie just kind of nosedives in that last half hour. It kind of gets a bit shaky. I feel like Fennell keeps throwing in these kind of shock scenes that are unnecessary. The dirt scene, we'll call it that.
Yes.
In both screenings, people were laughing, not purposefully, I don't think. It's meant to be kind of like oh my goodness, he's doing that. And people just went, oh, come on.
Same with what is now being referred to as like the plug hole scene. In my screen, there was quite a lot of uncomfortable laughter. I mean, it's pretty like out there and extreme, and props to Barry Keoghan for going that far. From a selfish point as well, I'm actually kind of glad this movie exists, because I do video reviews on TikTok as well, and this has gotten over 120,000 views on there so far, which is insane. So from that completely selfish point of view, I'm glad this movie exists.
I don't want people to come away thinking it's terrible, because that's not what I'm trying to say. I think, like I said, there's things about it that work, but all the stuff that doesn't work is all the stuff that kind of pops up in the last half hour, seemingly out of a completely different script. Like, if you're going to make The Talented Mr. Ripley, maybe start out making that movie.
I agree, yeah. I think there's a lot to admire about it, but ultimately, yeah, I don't really love it as much as other people do.
When we're doing the main press days, or at least for me, I try to maximise as many films in a day, so I saw 3 films every single day for the next week.
Nice.
So there's like morning, lunchtime, afternoon. I was planning to see Fancy Dance, which starred Lily Gladstone, who of course is in Killers of the Flower Moon, which is going to be like a major movie at the festival, so I wanted to go and see that. Unfortunately, it seems like everyone else wanted to see that movie for the exact same reason, and it filled up very, very quickly. They wanted it to not be as competitive, not having loads and loads of queues. That was not the case. It really felt competitive this year. It really felt like everyone was kind of racing to get into some of those big titles, unfortunately.
Yeah, there was a lot of like hanging around for when like the tokens would be giving out for like, for example, the Killer or something like that. There was a lot of waiting around. Then BFI staff, I mean, God bless them, they were trying to dissuade people from queuing around, but they just kept at it anyway.
People were queuing for ages for some titles, even well before they opened. It was ridiculous in some cases, and I don't think that's the fault of the BFI staff. I think that's just because that was kind of the attitude that kind of through the festival somewhat. I think that people were so kind of eager, like, I've got to see this. But so I always made sure in every slot that I had a kind of backup film, something else that might not necessarily have been my first choice, but could surprise me. So Shortcomings was my second choice for this slot. I wasn't intending to see this because it was already out quite a while in America by this point. This is the directorial debut by Randall Park of the Adrian Tomine graphic novel. Again, I've covered this in a very quick short about a few weeks ago, because it came out on VOD very shortly after the festival in the UK. Justin H. Min is an art house cinema owner. He's an aspiring filmmaker. He's very frustrated. He's extremely passive-aggressive, and he takes it out on pretty much everyone around him, and is just pushing them all the way. Did you catch up with this at all?
I didn't. I'll be honest. I didn't even know this was available on demand.
It was a very quiet release.
Yeah, otherwise I would have covered it. Yeah, that's a shame. Yeah, because I heard good things other than the stuff that you're about to say, but like, yeah, I'm surprised about that.
Yeah, I liked it quite a bit. I thought it was quite funny. It's again kind of like a small, quirky indie movie. That's the kind of vibe that you kind of expect from this. Sherry Coler's in it playing his best friend, who is just as kind of acidic as he is to a certain degree, but she learns to adapt. Coler's quite funny. Of course, she popped up recently in Joyride. The third act of this movie kind of wobbles a little bit when it goes over to New York, because the main character over the course of the film, he gets more and more desperate. Like, he gets broken up with his girlfriend very early on, and then he starts kind of rebounding with all these white blonde women that are much younger than him, but he can barely kind of conceal his contempt for them in some instances.
Oh, yeah.
So there's this kind of really uncomfortable comedy kind of playing throughout this, and sometimes it's really amusing, and then other times you just kind of want to strangle the main character, but that's kind of the point. Like, there are moments where other characters are like, I'm this close to throwing my drink in your face. I think some of us can relate to that, you know, like being kind of becoming this unpleasant person because of circumstances and then trying to move past that to a degree. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's like a major movie in any way, but it shows promise for Randall Park as a director. It's a decent comedy, but it's nothing more than that, really.
Sure. Again, I didn't see this, so I have nothing to add other than, I'm just surprised that it went to VOD very, very quickly.
Finally, in the afternoon slot, we have The Sweet East.
Oh, I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this one.
One of the WTF movies of the festival. So, The Sweet East is about a high school senior called Lillian, played by Talia Ryder from Never, Sometimes, Rarely, Always. Have I got that title correct?
Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, I think. Yeah.
Yes. She gets separated from her class because they're in a pizza restaurant and it gets attacked by a conspiracy theorist, and this essentially turns her into Alice in right-wing land. She basically makes her way through all these kind of conspiracy theorists and various different extremists, just kind of making her way all across the East Coast of the United States. It's a very episodic narrative. This is a very peculiar movie. It's the directorial debut of Sean Price Williams, who was the cinematographer for the Safdie brothers. It's so strange because it turns into several different movies. The early portion of the movie, she's with Earl Cave, their kind of group of activists, but they're incompetent. There's an early scene where he flashes his heavily pierced genitalia at her, and that kind of sets up the tone. It's kind of bad taste, and it's kind of doing some kind of unexpected things. And so sometimes you kind of go along with that, and then other times you go, oh, for goodness sake, this is a little bit childish. One of the weirdest things about The Sweet East, there is this recurring thing where the characters use the R slur constantly in a lot of the dialogue, like, oh, that's R slur, and things like that. And I sat there watching that going, do teenagers these days use that term? I know teenagers when I was growing up about a decade ago were still using that, but I don't think they still commonly throw that around these days. It just feels like it's kind of there to just be kind of provocative. Ooh, they said that.
Written by people who have no idea how young people today speak.
It goes into various different characters. She ends up, for a good chunk of the movie, with a professor played by Simon Rex of Red Rocket. He is a neo-Nazi, and there are several moments where they're around the house and he's kind of talking about all these fascist conspiracy theories or just outright racist statements. There's a moment where Lillian actually wakes up in a bed and it's covered in swastikas and things like that. Oh. Yeah, this section of the movie gets really uncomfortable. Talia Ryder's performance, there is something quite magnetic about her in the lead role, and she's quite enigmatic in a way. I think Lillian is the kind of character, it almost feels like she's passive, in that she just kind of is there and just kind of absorbs what's happening, but there is a little bit of savviness to that character. She does kind of wait for her moment to a degree. The opening credit sequence is actually a musical number. She's in the bathroom of the pizza place, and then she turns directly towards the camera, and she has this entire song with the lyrics like, I'm the cat, the idea that she always lands on her feet in some way. Like, she gets out of one scenario, she ends up in another one, and then ends up going into the next one, and so on and so forth. There's a section of the movie where she ends up with Ayo Adebari. She's one half of a pair of filmmakers that hire her to be the the lead actress in a period movie with Jacob Elordi, second movie of the day.
Hey.
He's like this big movie star. Sometimes the movie feels like it's set in our world and it's commenting explicitly on this underbelly in America, and then other times it takes this very fantastical elements. Like, there are moments where she's on the front cover of magazines, she's a missing person and no one seems to recognize her, weird kind of details. That plotline ends in a sudden burst of violence where people were like having their heads caved in by shotguns and things like that. Like, really sudden, brutal violence. And then it goes into this last portion of the movie where she's kind of holed up with another group of extremists, kind of hiding away. One of the crew members takes her in. As the movie progresses, it gets more and more surreal. There's a moment where she looks through a telescope and she sees this fantasy kingdom. There's a moment where they walk out into nature, and then suddenly it turns into this elaborate matte painting where they're kind of looking over the cliffs. Over the course of it, it loses deliberately its sense of reality. I think near the end of it, she ends up in this almost Transylvanian castle somewhere. Again, it's one of those movies that doesn't feel very coherent. Like, there's lots of individually memorable moments, but as far as what it's trying to say, other than the fact that there is obviously this unsettling fascist underbelly to the United States, there are certain pockets of the culture that are just there. Aside from pointing out that those things exist, I don't know what this movie is trying to say.
Everything you've just described, it sounds like an alternative title should be like Beau is Confused or something like that. Because it definitely sounds like this very kind of like strange Odyssey, like Wonderland kind of thing, but obviously, and even in Beau is Afraid, there's obviously a lot of fantastical elements in there too. But I've only seen the trailer for this. I haven't seen the actual film, and the trailer for it is just baffling. And I don't know whether to just respect it for just going completely out there, or just like with The Beast, just being there singing. I'm just like, what? It's
the kind of movie where something happens right in the final moments of it, and then suddenly Talia Ryder looks directly into the camera, and then it cuts to a title card saying everything will happen. And you just go, what? What?
Because why wouldn't it end like that?
A real odd dreamscape of a movie. I kind of respected it for the swings that it took.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's entirely coherent, but certainly it's quite a calling card movie for a debut director. Day 2 of the festival, so this is Thursday. The first movie is the big movie, The Bikeriders.
Yes.
This is based on Danny Lyon's book, a photography book, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
It's set in the 1960s following a fictional motorcycle gang in Chicago that's set up by Tom Hardy's Johnny. Austin Butler Benny is a part of that group, and he ends up getting married to Jodie Comer's Kathy, and the movie is portrayed through flashbacks, with Lyon, actually played in the film by Mike Faust, conducting a series of interviews with Kathy and a number of the bikers involved with this gang, and you kind of see the culture change and shift as the decade goes on and starts to move into the 70s. It's directed by Jeff Nichols, who directed Midnight Special, Take Shelter, Loving. I liked this quite a bit, actually. I wasn't expecting to like this, but I really did.
Yeah, I like this a lot too. I thought this was a really nice little meditation on what masculinity it was in the 60s, especially in that kind of like biker culture. I felt it was very smart with how it kind of made these characters feel real. Like, this could have just been like a celebration of that kind of not give an F style of living. But this was a much more tender, emotional even look at just how damaged a lot of these characters are, and how they kind of like form this kind of group to reclaim their masculinity somewhat. So
yeah, it's kind of set around like after the Vietnam War, and that's kind of going around in the background to a certain degree. And there's this feeling of Americana loss, but also these guys, they're lost in their sense of masculinity. They're looking for something to group together, and they find it in this sense of community in this biker gang, which have all these ridiculous testosterone-driven traditions that they've just kind of invented. Tom Hardy's Hardy's performance is another one of those where he has a strange accent that he seems to specialise in, but in this case, it's actually quite purposeful. There's an early moment where he's watching Marlon Brando in The Wild One. He sees that performance and he goes, I want to be that guy. And you can tell in the mannerisms that Hardy's doing, he's doing his Marlon Brando impression. Like, the guy is doing an impression the entire time of what he thinks this guy should be.
Yeah, because I know when the trailer dropped, people were just picking on Tom Hardy. He's like, what kind of accent is he doing now? But when you see the movie, it makes perfect sense that he's acting like that.
Yeah, and they've got this ridiculous thing, like, where they settle arguments, like, settle these kind of leadership debates with fists or knives. Fists or knives. And they just get down in an awkward, muddy, run-down kind of fight. Like, it's not glamorous, it's not like a Hollywood fight scene, it's two guys kind of tussling and breaking each other's fingers and things like that. It's really clumsy more than anything. And then you've got Jodie Comer coming into this, and I've seen some kind of split decisions on her Chicago accent. I think it's a difficult accent to do. But I actually really liked her in this movie, especially because her character, while she's in this gang, obviously she's got that outsider element being a woman. So she has this view that's different to everyone else, that's a little bit more clear-minded about the biker gang. She kind of sees it for what it is to a certain degree. And then she falls for Austin Butler's character. And at first I wasn't sure what to make of Butler's performance, because it's a performance that definitely rides on the fact that Butler has this kind of iconic look about him, and obviously
he's very James Dean. Yeah,
absolutely, he is embodying that. And there are several moments where the cinematography deliberately echoes the photography that inspired the book. They deliberately replicate that in several points of the movie, and they actually show a lot of those photographs in the closing credits. In the first portion of the movie, Butler's character is a little bit ill-defined because he is literally that iconic figure, but then over the course of the movie you kind of get more of a sense of this guy who just really likes being in this world. He finds a kind of freedom in being this motorcycle rider. And Hardy's character, he's realizing that he is getting older now. He probably shouldn't be leading this biker gang. He notices this kind of shift that's happening, and he wants Butler's character to take his place, but Butler's character doesn't want to really step into that leadership role. He's uncomfortable about it. He's not the guy that leads everyone.
Yeah, he's just the kind of guy who just wants to do what he does.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I could definitely relate to that. I mean, I love doing what I do as well. All the stuff with writing and watching films and stuff. I'm just happy being, what I want to do. And I felt like that's really reflected in this. And I thought, so Austin Butler's great. Obviously, he's great as Elvis, but here the movie style really comes out of it. And with Jodie Comer, she's great in just about anything I see her in. And here, I thought she nailed the accent perfectly, honestly.
She's a tough character. She kind of holds her own with the rest of this biker gang. But of course, it has that changing era, and toxic masculinity creeps into this environment. Like early on, there's a moment where someone from another biker gang comes in, and that's kind of meant to be, representative of that was that time. Like, if you had biker gangs coming up against other biker gangs now, there would be this kind of real, like, violence and territorial thing going on. And before that, there was a kind of innocence about all of this to a certain degree. Like, yeah, they do get up to shenanigans at several points, but nothing on the level of where it eventually ends up. There's this subplot with this kid who comes from this abusive background. He really wants to join into this motorcycle gang, but he's refused, and he doesn't really have any kind of loyalty. He just wanting to have that kind of position of power, and that kind of coincides with these other bikers that just come in and just see the gang as an excuse to do reprehensible behaviour. You can just see the whole scene start to curdle.
You definitely see a progression of how this whole thing becomes more and more dangerous. Like, I mean, they start burning down buildings, and there are some members that try and have their way with another character. And obviously there are even some one or two deaths, maybe.
Yeah, but it gets quite threatening and quite dangerous.
Oh yeah, you definitely see the progression with that. And Jeff Nichols, whose work I've really liked in the past, he's really good at just letting it all just kind of flow naturally. It really comes authentic to the time.
It has that genuine sense of accurately kind of transcribing the Americana and the machismo of that particular point in time, especially with Michael Shannon Shannon, of course, who previously was in several of his movies. Here he's got a smaller part as well.
You got Michael Shannon in there, you got Mike Face from West Side Story. Norman Reedus is in this, because, I mean, him and motorcycles go together like this.
Yeah, exactly. I really like this movie. It's been in quite a lot of trouble since it's actually been at the London Film Festival, because it was meant to be distributed by 20th Century Studios. The print that we saw had that logo at the front of it. That's not going to be on the one that you see, because Disney have decided that they're no longer distributing this movie. It's now been picked up by Focus Features and Universal. It's been long delayed. I think that means it probably won't get awards contention this year, unfortunately, although I do think some of those screenings have actually gone on. But basically, you'll see it next year. That's the situation with that now.
Because obviously it got pulled from the calendar because of the actor strike, but obviously now that's been resolved, and they've really painted themselves into a corner, just like, yeah, you can have it, Universal.
Yeah, I think Disney saw what happened with The Creator and went, I don't think we're into making adult movies, or movies made for adults even.
Yeah, and if you can't trust the people at Disney to make good decisions with their movies, who can you trust?
Exactly. Movie number 2 of the day, another biggie, The Killer, which of course is already out by this point, but I haven't found time to make a video. This is the reason why I'm doing this in the first place. There's like 30 odd movies here. I can't do a video for every single one of these, but I can hit every single one of them in this video. So if you wanted to see my opinion on them, they're all here at the very least. Some of these I'm going to revisit as bigger videos. I'm not sure about The Killer. It might have been out too long. So this is the new David Fincher movie. Michael Fassbender is the titular killer. His latest assignment goes wrong. He hits the wrong target and then finds that the people who hired him have turned on him and are trying to attack him, and basically tries to get revenge on them. I wasn't hugely enamored with this. I believe it's a reteaming with Andrew Kevin Walker, who previously worked with him on Seven. He wrote the screenplay. It's adapted from this French graphic novel, I believe. I just couldn't really get into this. I feel bad because a lot of people really seem to like it on Twitter when it first came out. There was a lot of people going like, oh, it's great Fincher. And I go, is it? It's really well done on a technical level. That's inarguable for Fincher. He always creates something that is really technically well made and interesting. There's a lot of moments that I think are well directed, but it also feels weirdly disposable. It feels weirdly like a kind of minor Fincher movie. It feels kind of on the level of something like The Game or something like that, where it's a decent enough movie. I think for any other filmmaker, it would be a great one. But with Fincher, the expectations are a little bit higher.
I like David Fincher as much as the next person, but I was literally there in the same screening, and I was just like, yeah, this isn't working. Like, I don't know what it is, because when you break it down, the film is pretty much just about every assassin hitman movie that you could imagine. Like, he's really skilled at his job and whatever, something goes wrong and now he's got to fight the people he used to work for. Yeah, you've seen this movie before. There's no other way to say it. You've seen this movie many times. It just happens to be under David Fincher's direction,
Yeah, it just happens to be far more polished than it usually is.
Oh, absolutely.
And admittedly, I've sat through quite a few bad assassin movies this year. Definitely the best one of those, but still very familiar territory.
I was watching it thinking like, this is exactly what Glenn Powell would be doing if he didn't have that charisma. You know, it's just like...
Exactly. Oh. It's the movie that's playing in his head in Hitman. I just found this a really cold movie. Like, there is dark comedy in the film. Fassbender's Hitman is almost entirely speaking in the narration. I think he only says a handful of actual lines over the course of the movie that aren't in the voiceover narration. There's a bit where he's closing a bank account and he's offered something and he just answers, interesting, and just walks out. Like, that's quite a funny moment. But man, the voiceover in this movie I felt was too much.
It's a lot.
It is a lot of voiceover, and I know that's actually quite true of the comic that it's based on. It has a lot of that kind of interior monologue, but it's just constantly over the course of it. And I know that there's meant to be this discrepancy between how he sees himself as being this perfect professional, and he has all these thoughts to himself about, I do this, and I don't do that, and I don't improvise. And then over the course of the movie, he kind of breaks those rules and see how ridiculous those sort of things are. But I don't think otherwise there's much humanity to the movie. It's not an action movie. It's very deliberately designed to not be an action movie. Like, it only has one major action set piece, a great action set piece, in actual fact, where he breaks into this house and he comes across this massive burly guy, and it's this very stylized fight sequence where every time this guy punches him, the screen seems to shake and he dents into the walls. Really hyper stylized stuff. I thought that was one of the big highlights of the movie.
Oh yeah, it's definitely the best scene in the movie, and you know, it's really well shot. Cinematographer Eric Messerschmidt, who worked with Fincher and won the Oscar for Mank. It's a beautifully shot film. I mean, David Fincher is just a great director anyway, and he knows exactly the right kind of people to work with. And Eric Messerschmidt, he really kind of brings that grittiness to the scene. It's still the substance that they're working from. I mean, stylistically, it's great, but it doesn't really do much to really set itself apart from just about everything else that is in your mind while you're watching it.
There are some individually great moments. I liked the weird touch that he's in a WeWork office at the beginning of the movie. That's his little hideout, just this abandoned WeWork office, which feels like a minor kind of political statement. I liked that touch. The scene with Tilda Swinton is great. Tilda Swinton pops up quite late in the movie. I think at one point a character refers to her as being like a Q-tip, and then later on when he sees her, he goes, she does look like a Q-tip.
Yeah, she does.
Like
with the white hair, yeah. No, Tilda Swinton, yeah, she's got a good standout scene. She gets to tell a funny joke at one point that actually had the screening laughing quite a bit.
It's just a very remote movie. It's just, I just felt detached from it. I never really synced up with it properly. I mean, I got it. I understood what it was doing, but it just wasn't really working for me. It just felt a little bit too muted, a little bit too grim, and a little bit too remote a lot of the time. It's a good example of this is what happens when a great director handles fairly familiar material, but I don't think it's a great Fincher movie.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the same boat with this one. I wasn't really enamored with it. It was a slight disappointment because I was expecting this to be, you know, just kind of be, like you say, classic Fincher, and it's not. You know, it's fine as it is, but it's not one that I'm really gonna like revisit anytime soon. So yeah, it's middling for me.
Last movie of the day, Bonus Track. Set in 2006, George Bobbin, played by Joe Anders. He's a 16-year-old. He's about to flunk his GCSEs when the son of two pop stars that have split, Max, played by Samuel Small, comes to his school and they start building a relationship with each other. This is a Sky Cinema movie, I believe, so that's going to be where it's eventually going to land. It's based on a story by Josh O'Connor, who actually has a cameo in the movie. He plays a tattoo artist at one point. That he's like a tattoo artist, kind of graffiti artist. He wants to be a would-be Banksy type. It's an amusing little cameo that kind of pops up for a couple of minutes.
Kind of sounds like what George McKay was trying to do in The Beast, but it sounds like Josh O'Connor does it better.
You can tell it's a low-budget movie, and it feels like the kind of film that was made for something like Sky Cinema. It feels like it was made for television in a lot of ways. Like, yeah, it's got the scope kind of format, but there's something about the way that it handles itself and the way the budget is on screen. It feels very much like a television movie. I wanted to like this a little bit more than I did. I mean, it's fine enough. The movie overplays the awkwardness of the main character, especially in the earlier scenes. I feel like early on, he's so introverted to an almost painful degree. This is the second of two movies that are set around the time that I was growing up, which technically make them period pieces. It felt a little bit too recognisable of me to a certain degree, but if it was like even worse than how I was back then. I like the way the kind of love story kind of happens. I feel like Samuel Small as Max is much more interesting than Anders as Bobbin. As Bobbin starts to find more of his identity, that loosens up a little bit, but there's something about the movie where it never quite clicks, it never quite finds its rhythm, despite being, you know, this musical movie. I feel like they could have pushed that a little bit further. There's also this subplot going on with Jack Davenport. He plays George's father, who is this real stuffed shirt type, and his family's going through problems. And I like Davenport's performance, but it's very hard to describe without feeling too mean about it. It just doesn't quite work for me. It feels a little bit undercooked. It feels like the kind of movie that had a lot of promise, but when it's on screen, it just kind of falls a little bit flat. This is a feature debut for Julia Jackman. I think you can kind of tell it has that uncertainty in its direction. It never quite knows what it wants to be. This could have been a really rousing crowd pleaser. As it stands, it's fine. It's a fairly forgettable Sky Cinema movie overall, though.
I haven't seen this film, so like I'm only just kind of learning about it, just hearing you speak. It sounds like one of those like very light-hearted, nothing too heavy, like teen dramas, like something in the vein of like Heartstopper or something like that.
It's in that kind of vein. It wants to be that. I don't think it quite is.
No, of course not. No, that's Sky Cinema, right?
Yes, that will be a Sky Cinema movie in the UK. Don't know what its situation will be in the US.
Who knows?
That was a premiere at the festival, I believe.
Nice.
Now we come to Friday, day 3. First movie of the day, May December. Another Sky Cinema title in the UK. I believe it's Netflix in the US. This is Todd Haynes' latest. Todd Haynes, who did Carol. This one is apparently very loosely inspired by the story of Mary Kay Letourneau. An actress played by Natalie Portman travels to Georgia to study the life of Julianne Moore. She plays this very controversial woman who is married to a much younger man played by Charles Melson, who she had an indecent relationship with 23 years ago when he was still a boy. The actress is planning to make a film about these events, and then drama happens.
Drama in quotations.
Yeah. I had to quickly adjust my expectations for this movie because obviously I didn't know very much about it aside from the poster, and the poster kind of makes it look a bit like Carol. Like I thought, oh, is this what this kind of movie is? And then very quickly, there's an early scene where Julianne Moore, she's looking through her fridge and she goes, "We're all out of hot dogs." And suddenly a dramatic music sting swells. And at which point I suddenly realised, oh, this is kind of a dark comedy.
I should clarify, I didn't see this during the festival. I actually saw this during its theatrical run here in the UK. I saw that and it's just like, it was at that moment, it was just like, okay, it's definitely like satirised that kind of like Lifetime movie kind of structure, you know, with the really over-dramatic kind of musical stingers and like really tight zooms cinematography. I mean, I'll let you carry on, but it's a very peculiar film, to say the least.
It's kind of using those melodramatic conventions that Haynes often uses in his work, but uses it to satirise and puncture the insecurity of these characters. They're worried about their self-images in different ways. Mirrors are a recurring element in the movie. There's a big scene where Moore is teaching Portman how to do makeup like she does to try and get her into character. You got Portman playing this very self-absorbed actress. She clearly wants to move up into being something more prestigious than she actually is. It's kind of implied that she's been in some kind of low rent projects in the past, and so she doesn't have the best judgment overall, and she's kind of like this weird person that has to experience everything like the character does. She visits the pet store where a big event happened to do with this story, and she kind of does a somewhat deranged act, shall we say, at that juncture. There's a later scene where she's having this big speech in a drama class to a bunch of high schoolers. It gets into a very inappropriate territory, to say the least. But also you got Moore's character, who seems to be going through some kind of emotional crisis, especially because it's kind of digging up all of this stuff from the past that have been left behind. But I thought the most interesting character in the movie is Charles Melson's, because arguably he's grown up now, he's had children of his own from this relationship, and they're at the age that he was past that, and he's seeing all the stuff that he missed because of this ongoing scandal. Like, he had his childhood taken away from him. There's the moment where he's on the roof with his son and they're kind of passing the reefer between each other, like, oh, you haven't done this before? Like, you just get the sense that they've turned it into this image of normality, and then gradually realising, no, I have been damaged by this to a degree. And it's a thorny movie. It deliberately makes the audience uncomfortable with the subject matter. You mentioned the score. The interesting thing about the score is that it's the score from the go-between, so it kind of sets up this idea of the intermediary, like there's someone interpreting. And I feel like there is that element there, especially with Portman's character, where she's trying to piece together what's really going on. At the same time, I don't think she properly understands it, and I think the movie is making fun of her for that as well.
Yeah, it's like a lot of her dialogue, just normal conversations with people. It feels like a lot of that regular PR speak that you kind of get, like, she's always talking about, like, it's the moral grey areas, yeah, and she just drops them in normal conversations, and it's like, there's something very off about this. I mean, it was amusing. Yeah. I didn't quite get into it as much as you perhaps did, only because I heard so much about the film having these very campy elements, these catty moments between Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore, which are there, definitely, and they're great in the movie. When I was watching it, I was feeling like, oh, this is a lot more subdued than I was expecting, which isn't necessarily bad. It's just like not quite sure what I was expecting. Again, like the stuff with Charles Melton, who's honestly fantastic here, and the stuff with him, it just kind of, you just see the slow realization growing in his eyes. Like, he's at a point in his parenthood where his kids are about to go up to college and he's getting empty nest syndrome, which, you know, for a man in his late 30s is quite unusual in and of itself. It's a very creepy in that sense. Like, it's a very...
There is something about it that is kind of a little bit sinister as well. It always keeps the audience a little bit on their toes somewhat. It is a challenging movie, I think.
Yeah, I think I didn't love it perhaps as much as other people did, but I respect the choices that it made, and I think the performances, again, really do carry it. I just felt I was kind of
really
expecting
strong.
a bit more from it, you know, like I was expecting to play it up just a little bit, but that's just me. Maybe that's just me not respecting
That's fine. I'm amazed that I actually liked this movie as much as I did, because I end up seeing it in the front row. Wow. There was one screening of this movie, and I got into the front row centre, and I'm going to throw a screenshot on screen if you're watching the video version of the podcast. Really tight angle. I'm glad I was watching it in the centre of the front row at the very least.
Having sat in the front row of that particular screen, I feel your pain. Like, seriously.
Yeah, it's not a pleasant experience. Your nose is practically touching the screen.
It really is.
Even with the seats reclined back, it's still difficult. I was glad it wasn't a movie that really relied visually on a lot of information. Like, yeah, you get those text captions and things like that, but it wasn't something like an action movie where you really need to follow what was on the screen. It is quite dialogue based, so if I had to be in the front row of a movie, I suppose that's one of the better ones. yeah,
who knows? Yeah, maybe that's how I need to view the film next. Yeah, I do want to see this movie again, just to see if there's anything who knows, I might like it even more the next time.
I do think it's the kind of movie that might play a little bit differently on multiple viewings. I do think that there's kind of stuff there that kind of needs to be unpacked, as it were. Speaking of one of those movies, Eileen, which is adapted from the book by Otessa Moshfegh. It's set in the 1960s in New England. The titular Eileen is played by Thomasin McKenzie. She works in a prison when a new counsellor played by Anne Hathaway comes in, and she becomes obsessed with her. And then things take a little bit of a dark turn. I seem to be saying that a lot over the course of this podcast.
A lot of dark turns taken with all these films. Who knew?
This is the new film from the director of Lady Macbeth, William Oldroyd. This is one of those where, again, it's categorised as being a thriller. I'd more say it's just a drama. I feel like there's a bit of a fear of calling something a drama these days because people might consider it boring if it's a drama, but I would say it is a drama, and they're only later on, like Saltburn does, kind of drift into thriller territory. I feel like it's well accomplished, and that you kind of get this feeling of this really insular, small town. She's come from this kind of abusive background. Shea Wiggum is this former cop. He's an alcoholic. He's had his gun taken away from him because he doesn't know how to handle himself, and he's insulting Eileen quite a lot, really damaging her self-esteem. You can tell that she's desperate to escape from this world, and then she sees Anne Hathaway's character, and she is all the things that she would like to be. She's this Hollywood glamour that feels out of place in this environment. She's immediately drawn towards her. And playing in the background of all this is that there's this subplot involving this very young prisoner who killed his father. But a lot of the movie actually focuses on the relationship between Mackenzie and Hathaway's characters. Mackenzie has an obvious attraction towards Hathaway, and it's kind of ambiguous how much that's actually reciprocated. And it's two very strong performances by both of the leads here. Again, I felt like this was a really slow burner, and I don't just mean mean in the sense of Eileen's car filling up with smoke every time she drives it because it's a real old banger. I mean, like, it's building towards something, and it has these dream sequences by Eileen where she kind of imagines various scenarios, quite violent scenarios. Like, early on, there's a moment where she's looking at a prison guard and then suddenly imagines them just having sex in the middle of the prison all of a sudden, and then snaps back into reality. So there's this blurring between fantasy and reality, and you know that at some point that's going to snap. At some point, something's going to happen, and it's not going to be a fantasy anymore. It's just going to happen. And that's really effective when it finally does. There is this Hitchcockian intrigue to the movie, and then it goes into thriller territory all of a sudden. Again, I thought this dark turn was probably something that the movie should have done a little bit earlier. The movie drifts a little bit too long without that kind of real jolt that would have provided into the story. Again, it kind of gets into this really tense scenario with these characters and what they do, but mostly it's more of a character piece, but I felt it was a little bit too subdued overall.
I didn't see the film during the festival, but as of recording, this movie's out tomorrow in the UK and
in the US, I believe, as well.
And in the US, so I'm seeing it literally tomorrow. So I don't know. I'll see how in 24 hours how that fares up. But I loved Lady Macbeth, which Olroyd did before, and I think this is his first film since then, which is surprising because obviously Lady Macbeth did really well. I am intrigued to see this because, again, I don't know if the trailers are necessarily an accurate representation of what the film is, but it looks like it plays into the psychological a lot, like it is obviously with the kaleidoscopic images in that trailer. But I do like these actors. I think Thomasin McKenzie is really good screen presence to her. I think she's a very, very bright actor, and obviously I like Hannah Hathaway a lot too.
I feel like the trailer kind of plays up the thriller angle more than the actual movie itself does. So I think if you come into this expecting like it to be a tense thriller, it's not that movie. It's much more of a character piece.
Okay, well, that's good. That might be more interesting. I mean, I've heard mixed things about this one, but I'll see how it is when I see it tomorrow. I
can understand why it's got a mixed reception. I think it's a little bit too muted for its own good overall.
Yeah, I'm not expecting like this to be like Lady Macbeth good. Yeah, I'm just happy that William Allroyd's making films again.
The lunchtime movie that you probably wouldn't actually watch at lunchtime is actually one of my big discoveries for the fest. It's called Hoard. It's a British movie. I think this is really good. So it follows the relationship between a mother and daughter. The mother is a hoarder played by Hayley Squires. The daughter is Marie, played by Lily Blue Leach. They live in a world that is absolutely filled with rubbish, and we see it from the perspective of young Marie, and it's this magical world where things can just be found in trash. But also it's very clear that her mother is deeply emotionally damaged. Then something happens and Marie finds herself in care. She becomes a teenager a few years later, played by Sora Lightfoot, I believe making her film debut here. She discovers that her mother has died, and this triggers that trauma within her, and suddenly she develops a hoarding habit by herself. This is a directorial debut for Luna Carmoon. I think we might be seeing a lot more of her. This was one of those movies that is genuinely unpredictable. I didn't have any expectations going into this at all. And then I really got into it. The magical realism that the movie started out with, it kind of starts out in this really interesting place from this child's eye point of view. And Squires is fantastic in a fairly limited role. She pretty much leaves the movie about 15 to 20 minutes in, but you feel her presence for the entire rest of the running time. But it's Lightfoot that is really fantastic in a quite complicated role. She's becoming this young woman, and then suddenly she's got all this trauma that she hasn't really processed because it happened when she was too young to really recognise what happened to her. It's kind of all misplaced, and so she ends up taking in all this rubbish and hiding it and stashing it, and the only person that seems to recognise that is a fellow foster kid played by Joseph Quinn, Michael. They have this very kind of strange relationship that develops over the course of the movie where he starts to enable her, but also seems like he's kind of attracted towards her because they kind of are the same in some ways. It's very hard to describe this movie. It's also got this real gross out streak to it that makes it genuinely kind of, oh, that's surprising. There's moments where characters do very, very disgusting things spontaneously. The two foster kids kind of form their bond by spitting in each other's hands. She sees it on television early on in the movie, and then she kind of repeats it. But it's really gross because she just gets this huge wattle of spit in her hands, like, ugh, oh, gross. That's not even the grossest thing that happens in this movie. But it's all about grief. It's all about loss and having to process all these complicated feelings that she hasn't quite realised what they are. I thought this was really fantastic. It's the kind of movie where you watch it and I go, I haven't seen this movie before. I don't quite know where this is going. And that's always really exciting when you find that kind of movie.
Again, this is another one I haven't seen, but I have heard a lot about it, because since it debuted, I think it was at Venice that I think it debuted at, and it's gotten a lot of really good buzz since then. And yeah, I'm really interested in seeing this. I think it's just gotten a release date sometime in May, I want to say. I don't know. From the sounds of it, it reminds me a lot of Scrapper.
I'm glad you mentioned that, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Because it felt like the kind of counterpoint to something like Scrapper. It felt like, you know how movies kind of feel like they should be parts of a double feature? It feels like it should be on a double feature with Scrapper, but it's the much darker, sharper version of something like that. Funnily enough, I think I saw Charlotte Regan, who directed Scrapper, at the festival. I think she was one of the industry types that just happened to be around. I didn't speak to her or anything. I just looked at her and I was like, I think you're who I think you are, but I don't know you and I'm not going to talk to you. And I was kind of lost in that moment anyway, because I think we were both simultaneously trying to figure out how we were going to navigate this very crowded environment to get to wherever we wanted to go at that particular point in time. So the only other person I recognised at the festival was Jonathan Ross.
Oh, nice.
I was going down the staircases at the Everyman. You know, I was looking down at the coffee area, and then suddenly I see, Jonathan Ross looking back at me. I'm like, oh, okay. Nice. I was like, I need to get my lunch. I'm fine.
But going back to Scrapper, because I love Scrapper. I think it's one of my favourite films of the year. From the sounds of it, if it sounds like it'll go like a nice double feature with that, in that sense, I'm definitely excited to see it now, because it sounds wonderful in a kind of grossish way.
There's elements of it that are kind of disturbing, and there's other elements that are almost fantastical in a lot of ways. It's a very hard to categorise movie, but I really recommend it. If you like kind of daring, kind of unusual movies that are in their own ways a little bit messy, but I think that actually works in this film's favour, go check out Hoard when it comes out at some point next year, because I think this is a really strong movie, and I think you can tell the word was getting around about this movie, because the first screening was in the big auditorium, and it was relatively full. For the subsequent screening, lots of people were trying to get into that one. I think that the word was spreading very quickly about how strong that movie was.
I think it's also the Joseph Quinn effect, because obviously he's become hugely popular with Stranger Things. And
yes,
I think
I wasn't familiar with him before, but I just watched him. I was like, it's like watching a young Andy Serkis in this movie.
He has kind of got that glare to him, I'll give him that. If rumours are true that, he's the, Human Torch or whatever, I mean, good casting. I mean, he's great in Stranger Things, so I'll be interested to check this out. And also, nice little story about Charlotte Regan there. I mean, she actually...
I don't know if it's much of a story, but it was just like...
it's a nice little encounter. Yeah, Charlotte Regan actually follows me on Instagram, so Charlotte, if you're listening, you made a great film, and congratulations.
And that, rather abruptly, is where our podcast finishes. You see, me and Jack realised at this point that we'd been recording for around 2 hours, but we weren't anywhere close to finishing, so we decided to pick up a few days later and do a whole other session covering the second week of the film festival, but have only just got around to finishing editing this first recording, so you might be waiting a little while for that one. My apologies to Jack that this has taken so long, and thanks to him for being a guest on both of these podcasts. In the meantime, while you're waiting for that, you can support the channel by going to my Ko-fi page and giving me a tip there, or with YouTube's Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video. You can also see it first on my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also sign up to YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can simply just like, share and subscribe, it all helps. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.